Thank you for watching Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Putnam. I am thankful to all news resources. Following are the news which have been reported by American, European and Canadian channels. African, Asian channels and all news agencies have reported the same news. Now the news in detail. Differences between America and Israel getting bigger after the UN resolution. Mr. Trump goes on trial next month. He has a problem arranging the $450 million bond. Chinese spy in Canada. How the COVID-19 affected the poor family in America. Consequences of terrorist attack in Moscow. Russia continue attack Ukraine capital with bombs and missiles, but no casualty reported. Japanese Prime Minister is willing to meet North Korean leader. China's backing of hackers in America. Antitrust investigation against Apple and Meta by European Union. Florida's governor signed a social media law which will bar minors. Boeing company shake up and rain and snow in the United States. Major Baseball League investigation. On Wall Street, Dow Jones down, Nasdaq down, S&P 500 also down. Abortion pill over the counter.
Good evening, I'm William Brangham. Amna Nawaz and Jeff Bennett are away. On the News Hour tonight, the rift between the U.S. and Israel widens due to United Nations resolution demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. Then, former President Trump will go on trial next month, and he gets a break on his multi-million-dollar bond while he appeals a separate civil fraud ruling. And how a pandemic-era child tax credit lifted some families out of poverty, but only temporarily.
You're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and eventually Paul runs out, and Peter. So you're left with nothing.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Glorfine, and the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation.
Actually, you don't need vision to do most things in life. Yes, I'm legally blind, and yes, I'm responsible for the user interface. Data visualization. If I can see it and understand it quickly, anyone can. It's exciting to be part of a team driving the technology forward. I think that's the most rewarding thing. People who know BDO.
2 retiring executives turn their focus to greyhounds, giving these former race dogs a real chance to win. The Raymond James Financial Advisor gets to know you, your purpose, and the way you give back. Life well planned.
The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world at hewlett.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the News Hour. There is a public break tonight between the United States and Israel after the U.S. refused to veto a UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused the U.S. of changing its position on the war in Gaza and canceled a planned visit of his top aides to Washington. Nick Schifrin is here now with more on these fast-moving developments. Nick, what is it that happened today that led to this very public disagreement?
The UN Security Council today, for the first time in more than 5 months of war, demanded a ceasefire in Gaza. And it did so because, as you just said, the U.S. abstained on a vote. Resolution 2728, quote, demands an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, respected by all parties, leading to a lasting and sustainable ceasefire, and also demands the immediate has-been tension between the administration and the Israeli government today particularly public.
Nick Schifrin, as always, thank you so much. Thank you. In the day's other headlines, Russian officials raised the death toll to 139 in the Friday night terror attack outside Moscow. Today, the Kremlin talked of vengeance as investigators worked the scene. Stephanie Sy reports.
Crocus City Hall is a charred shell of debris and devastation. Rescue workers search for bodies buried in its ruins. Days after attackers armed with rifles and knives lay waste to a rock concert. It was the deadliest terror attack in Russia in decades. Today, Russian President Vladimir Putin said radical Islamists were behind the massacre, but he also continued to implicate Ukraine without evidence.
We know that the crime was committed by the hands of radical Islamists, whose ideology the Islamic world itself has been fighting for centuries. We are interested in some part of it.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky denounced the suggestion. 4 main suspects appeared in a Russian court and appear to have been beaten. They're all of Tajik descent. The Islamic State's Afghan branch, ISIS-K, posted this video claiming responsibility for the attack, a claim verified by the U.S., which had shared intelligence with Moscow ahead of time.
They've been preparing this for some time. The U.S. had given warnings a few weeks ago that this attack could take place.
Paul Colby is a former operations officer for the CIA, with a focus on Eastern Europe and counterterrorism. ISIS has attacked Russia a number of times over the years, and has recently begun recruiting heavily from Central Asia, including Tajikistan.
Tajik workers are in Moscow, so they provide both a willing and attractive recruitment pool for ISIS-K because they have access to Russia, because they can be radicalized, and because they can be bought relatively cheaply.
The deadly attack has shaken Russia, days after President Putin, fresh from securing a fifth term, promised stability. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stephanie Tsai.
The attack in Moscow has done nothing to slow Russia's renewed bombardment of Ukraine's capital. Today, missiles were fired at Kyiv for the third time in 5 days. After some of the weapons were intercepted, debris fell on homes, injuring 9 people. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has offered to meet with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. It would be these two nations' first summit in nearly 2 decades, if it happens. Kim's sister, Kim Yo-jong, announced it today, but she insisted Tokyo accept the North's weapons program and ignore abductions of Japanese citizens. Japan acknowledged it wants a summit, but with no preconditions. The US and Britain say China was behind a sweeping hacking campaign against lawmakers, defense contractors, and others. Today, they sanctioned a company said to be a front for Beijing. The US Justice Department said it underscores, quote, the potential for cyber-enabled foreign malign influence as we approach the 2024 election. The European Union launched new antitrust probes into Apple, Google, and Meta today. Regulators say the tech giants may be violating a new Digital Markets Act, which aims to help consumers move freely between competing services and not be cornered by so-called gatekeeper companies.
Consumers must have access to all the necessary information about their choices. Gatekeepers can no longer prevent businesses from informing their users within the app about cheaper app options outside of the gatekeeper's ecosystem.
The tech companies dispute the allegations, but they could be fined 10% of their global annual income. Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis has signed one of the country's most restrictive social media laws for minors. It bars children under 14 from creating and owning accounts and requires parental permission for 15 and 16-year-olds. If it withstands legal challenges, the law takes effect next January 1st. An early spring snowstorm churned across the northern plains and upper Midwest today, while the south watched for thunderstorms and tornadoes. It followed a weekend storm in New England that dumped more than 2 feet of snow and knocked out power to hundreds of thousands. Police also reported hundreds of accidents. Boeing is shaking up its executive suite amid a plague of safety problems. The company announced today that David Calhoun will step down as CEO at the end of the year. The board chairman and the head of its commercial airplanes unit are also leaving. Boeing is under intense scrutiny after a 737 MAX lost a door panel mid-flight back in January. Los Angeles Dodger Shohei Ohtani says he never bet on sports. Ohtani spoke at a news conference today, 5 days after his interpreter was fired amid allegations that he engaged in illegal gambling and theft from Ohtani. Ohtani said his interpreter had been, quote, stealing money and has told lies. Major League Baseball has opened a formal investigation. And on Wall Street, stocks cooled a bit after last week's run-up to record highs. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 162 points to close at 39,313. The Nasdaq fell 44 points, and the S&P 500 was down 16. Still to come on the NewsHour, the fate of the most commonly used abortion pill goes before the U.S. Supreme Court. Tamara Keith and Susan Page break down the latest political headlines, and retired Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer discusses his new book on interpreting the Constitution.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
The first criminal trial of former President Donald Trump is set to begin next month after a judge today rejected Trump's claims of prosecutorial misconduct. That comes as a New York appeals court reduced the amount Trump needs to post in a bond for a civil fraud ruling by nearly $300 million and granted him an additional 10 days to secure that money. Andrea Bernstein has been covering all of the former president's legal matters for NPR, and she joins us now. Andrea, so good to see you. Let's first talk about this hush money case that you were in the courtroom for today. Trial was supposed to start today, but that was derailed by the sudden arrival of thousands of pages of new evidence. And Trump's lawyers argue that there was something nefarious going on here, but it sounds like the judge rejected those accusations.
This case will go to trial.
Andrea Bernstein, as always, thank you so much for helping us wade through all of this.
Thank you.
The U.S. Supreme Court will hear arguments tomorrow over whether to restrict access to mifepristone, one of 2 drugs used in medication abortions. The case will be the first the court has heard on abortion since it overturned Roe v. Wade. Special correspondent Sarah Varney reports on what's at stake.
In a doctor's basement in upstate New York, a makeshift production line is underway.
I have myself, my sister, and some friends who help me with doing the packaging.
To ensure this doctor's safety, NewsHour is not showing her face.
From patients across the country. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Sarah Varney in New York.
We now continue our series, America's Safety Net, about the government programs that help Americans in need. Tonight, we look at the pandemic, when lawmakers dramatically but temporarily expanded the social safety net, including more money for families with children. Amna Nawaz and producer Sam Lane report on how the impacts of those changes are still being felt and debated to this day.
Some days are better than others, but it can be pretty overwhelming.
Her family of 5 can stretch 35-year-old Daphne Chapman pretty thin.
The responsibility as a parent is on you to provide food, clothes.
Former President Trump gets a reprieve and a trial date. Congress steps back from the brink, but might have triggered another speaker fight. And the Supreme Court takes up abortion again. It is a perfect time for our Politics Monday team. That is Tamara Keith of NPR and Susan Page of USA Today. Amy Walter is away. Welcome to you both. Thank you so much for being here. Good to see you, Susan.
Great to be here.
Tam, cannot overlook the fact that this was a big legal day for Donald Trump. He gets a reprieve on the bond that he has to pay for the civil fraud ruling, but there is going to now be a trial in the middle of next month. Donald Trump will have to be in that courtroom every single day. We are in the middle of a presidential campaign. I feel like I have asked you this before, and Amna and Jeff have asked the same. We don't know how bad, but does this matter to voters, or is this a baked cake? And Susan Page, thank you both so much for being here. Great to see you.
Nice to see you. You're welcome.
For as long as America has had a constitution, there's been heated debate over how to interpret it. The U.S. Supreme Court is often where those debates are most intense, and their judgments the most far-reaching. For nearly 30 years, Stephen Breyer served on the nation's highest court, deciding cases that still resonate today. Breyer recently spoke with Amna Nawaz about how he interprets the nation's foundational document. That's the subject of his new book, Reading the Constitution, Why I Chose Pragmatism, Not Textualism.
Welcome back to the News Hour. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
So there is, I think it's fair to say, a sort of sense of mission of reading the Constitution. Thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed our discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. And that is the News Hour for tonight. I'm William Brangham. Thank you so much for joining us.
The UN Security Council passes its first resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Israel shows anger at its ally the US, which abstained from the vote. From prison to the presidency of Senegal, Bassirou Diomaye Faye is propelled by the popularity of opposition figure Ousmane Sonko, who is barred from running. President Macky Sall and his continuity candidate have conceded defeat. The first of 4 criminal trials against Donald Trump will begin in just 3 weeks after lawyers for the presumptive Republican presidential nominee failed to push back the hush money hearing, though they did manage to slash the bond payment in another case to a mere $175 million. Those of you just joining us, welcome to the France 24 Newsroom. I'm Alexander Walcott. Now, the UN Security Council has for the first time passed a resolution demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. In the 15-member body, 14 voted in favour. Israel's main ally, the United States, meanwhile, abstained, highlighting a growing rift between the nations. And Palestinians in Gaza expressed cautious hope that the resolution might help end the fighting that's caused a humanitarian disaster in the enclave.
Plumes of smoke billowed over the Rafah skyline as the Israeli army continued to close in on the southern Palestinian city. And while Monday's Security Council resolution raised faint hopes of a ceasefire, Gaza residents questioned whether it would be enough to end the Israeli offensive.
This is a major step to halt Israel's actions. The US, which is Israel's main advocating ally, must use all its resources to stop this war.
Israel doesn't care about resolutions issued by the Security Council, the UN, the ICJ, or anyone in the world.
The resolution, which was passed Monday after a U.S. abstention, called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, as well as lifting barriers to aid delivery and for the release of all hostages still held by Hamas. And while Washington later called the vote non-binding, the Palestinian ambassador to the UN vowed to use all means necessary to implement the resolution.
Security Council resolutions are binding, and if Israel is not going to implement it, then it is the duty of the Security Council to use Chapter 7 to take measures and punitive measures in order to make them obey the resolution.
Israel, meanwhile, slammed the U.S. abstention and accused Washington of retreating from its position.
This is a travesty.
But it appeared undeterred by the vote and said it would press on with its military operations in Gaza.
Moving on now to the war in Ukraine, where 10 people were killed by falling debris in Kyiv earlier after air defense systems downed 2 Russian missiles. President Volodymyr Zelensky again said the attack showed Ukraine needs better air defense systems from its allies. Moscow has recently escalated its aerial attacks on Kyiv following fatal Ukrainian bombardments on Russian border regions. President Vladimir Putin said Islamic militants were behind last week's attack on a concert hall outside Moscow, which killed 139 people, wounded more than 180. He also hinted that the deadliest attack inside Russia for 2 decades was to the benefit of Ukraine and that Kyiv may have played a role, accusations it fiercely denies. Soon after the mass shooting, 4 suspects who had signs of being beaten were dragged before the court. Charlotte Hughes has the story.
Although Kyiv has denied any involvement in the Crocus City Hall attack, which was claimed by the Islamic State group, Vladimir Putin insists that Ukraine is involved.
Это злодеяние может быть лишь звеном в целой серии против тех, кто с 2014 года воюет с нашей страной руками неонацистского киевского режима. А нацисты, как хорошо известно, никогда не брезговали использовать самые грязные и бесчеловечные средства для достижения своих целей.
Russian authorities said the alleged killers tried to escape to Ukraine, a claim that Kyiv has denied. After being dragged into the building, the 4 alleged gunmen behind the Crocus City Hall attack appeared before the Russian courts. All 4 appear to have been injured. According to a Turkish security official, the alleged attackers had briefly entered Turkey to renew their Russian residence permits. The official said that their radicalization did not happen there. 3 other suspects, who did not appear wounded, were remanded in pre-trial detention. At the scene of the attack, investigators and emergency workers continue to search through the rubble of the concert hall, destroyed after the assailants set fire to the building.
More than 90% of the whole area has been killed. You have a little less than 10% left. The most difficult areas are on the balcony of the auditorium. We are also examining the venue, meter by meter, with involvement of police dogs.
The attack is the deadliest claimed by the Islamic State group on the continent of Europe.
Next, New Zealand's security ministry has accused hackers linked to the Chinese government of state-sponsored operation targeting its parliament. The allegation of the hack, dating back to 2021, comes a day after the American and British authorities announced criminal charges and sanctions against 7 hackers living in China. New Zealand, though, saying it won't be following suit. Beijing has rejected the Western accusations as malicious slander, saying it does not support or condone cyber attacks.
When investigating and determining responsibility for cyber incidents, there should be sufficient evidence, rather than smearing other countries without factual basis. Moreover, cybersecurity issues shouldn't be politicized. We hope that all parties will stop spreading false information, take a responsible attitude, and work together to maintain peace and security online.
Less than a fortnight after his release from prison, Bassirou Diomaye Faye has been elected as president of Senegal. The West African nation's position as a pillar of democracy in the region had looked in doubt as President Macky Sall sought to postpone the vote, sparking sometimes violent protests. But both the outgoing leader and his favoured candidate, Amadou Ba, have now congratulated Faye on his victory, conceding defeat themselves. He was little known before the vote, but stood in for the popular opposition figure Ousmane Sonko, who was barred from running.
Senegal woke up to headlines celebrating a win for opposition candidate Bassirou Diomaye Faye after a night of celebrations that broke out with first tallies on Sunday evening. On Monday, ruling coalition candidate Amadou Ba conceded defeat.
I send my congratulations to President Diomaye Faye. I wish him success at the head of our country.
Electoral observers praise a day of largely peaceful voting, announcing a participation rate of around 61.6%.
No cases of violence or intimidation were observed in 99% of polling stations, or in the polling station observed in any case. A few altercations between voters were reported in the queue, but this had no major impact.
The vote came after months of political unrest, including deadly protests, sparked last summer by the jailing of the popular opposition leader Ousmane Sonko, and then a postponement of the election by outgoing President Macky Sall. These residents celebrated a triumph for democracy.
I'm satisfied because we consider democracy is advancing in our country.
In a move that diffused tensions just ahead of the election, Sonko was released from prison along with fellow opposition Pastive Party member Faye. Barred from the race due to a prior conviction, Sonko chose Faye to run in his place. His win marks a new era of promised left-wing Pan-Africanism, a major change in political direction for the country. Anti-establishment candidate Faye has never before held elected office, and at 44 will be the country's youngest ever head of state.
Out of the US, and this Monday, the former President Donald Trump has two important court dates. In the first, he sought to appeal a gargantuan debt handed to him in a civil fraud case in February with a hefty bond of nearly $500 million. The deadline was extended and the amount dropped. In the second, he sought to delay or cancel a trial in New York City on charges related to making hush money payments. But the court ruled it would go ahead in mid-April.
It was a busy day in court for Donald Trump, who currently faces 4 criminal cases, 2 of which coincided on Monday. In the first ruling, he received a small dose of good news. The appeal court agreed to reduce and momentarily hold off collection of a $454 million bond, staving off a potential financial crisis for the Republican frontrunner.
So I greatly respect the decision of the appellate division, and I'll post either $175 million in cash or bonds or security or whatever is necessary very quickly within the 10 days.
Trump also expressed discontent at Judge Engoron, who ruled against him in the February civil fraud case, which accused him of making false declarations about the value of his properties. Later the same day, Trump received another ruling, this time in the Manhattan case, where he is accused of covering up a sex scandal and by doing so violating campaign finance laws. The judge ruled that the trial will begin on April 15, making it likely that he will become the first former US president to go on trial for criminal charges.
This is a case that could have been brought 3.5 years ago. And now they're fighting over days because they want to try and do it during the election. This is election interference. That's all it is. Election interference. And it's a disgrace. Will obviously be appealed.
While Donald Trump sought to show his innocence, a small group of protesters gathered outside the court. They had one message written clearly in bold. It said, "Trump is guilty."
CEO of Boeing is to step down by the end of this year amid a major shake-up of the company's management. The US aviation giant has suffered from a series of high-profile catastrophes in recent years that have raised serious questions about safety and quality control of its aircraft. A door plug panel, which blew off a brand new Alaska Airlines jet mid-flight, appears to have been the final straw that put Boeing under intense scrutiny from regulators. Dika Bahel takes a look back at the series of crises hitting its reputation.
It's a major leadership shake-up for embattled aerospace giant Boeing as it fights to rebuild its scorched reputation. The company's CEO, Dave Calhoun, will step down by the year-end, with top executives Larry Kellner and Stan Deal also leaving.
We will remain squarely focused on completing the work we have done together to return our company to stability after the extraordinary challenges of the past 5 years, with safety and quality at the forefront of everything that we do.
The plane maker's full-blown safety crises kick-started in 2018 when a Boeing 737 MAX aircraft plunged into Indonesia's Java Sea shortly after takeoff, with no survivors. Just 6 months later, the death toll reached 346 when another 737 MAX went down in Ethiopia. The aftermath saw Boeing change leadership, as its MAX family jets were globally grounded for 2 years, as the crashes were caused by an error in its MCAS stabilizing system. Late last year, Boeing urged airlines to conduct inspections of its 737 MAX jets after a bolt with a missing nut was discovered on 2 aircraft during routine checks. January saw the most recent black eye for Boeing's quality control when the cabin panel of a brand new 737 MAX blew out at nearly 5,000 feet, leaving a gaping hole in the plane, later revealed by a National Safety Board probe to have been due to 4 crucial missing bolts in the door plug. According to the New York Times this month, air safety regulators at the FAA found dozens of problems in the 737 MAX's production after a 6-week manufacturing audit. Boeing is facing legal action from passengers, as well as a criminal probe into the incident.
Now, the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange will find out later this Tuesday whether he's run out of legal avenues to challenge his extradition from the UK to the United States. American prosecutors want to put the 52-year-old Australian on trial for multiple counts of violating the Espionage Act. They argue the release of US military records and diplomatic cables endangered the lives of its agents. Britain gave the go-ahead to his extradition in 2022, and later this morning at 10:30 local time, judges will rule on whether he can appeal. Those are all our top stories this hour. Do stay tuned to France 24.
The creation of the State of Israel triggered what Palestinians call the Nakba, or the catastrophe.
We fled our country in 1948.
The exodus led to the creation of several refugee camps in neighboring countries. Over the years, they have become sprawling towns, like Zarqa, a suburb of Amman, the capital of Jordan.
I'm of Palestinian origins and of Jordanian nationality. I can proudly say.
On this Monday night, a global news investigation. The Winnipeg man who served in the Chinese military branch blamed for cyber attacks against Canada.
Hi there.
The questions about how well Ottawa screens newcomers. The UN Security Council's first call for a ceasefire in Gaza.
The draft resolution has been adopted.
Why it's caused a rift between the US and Israel. The scheduled departure for Boeing's CEO.
We have another Mount one.
As the aerospace giant's reputation keeps nosediving. And lost in translation, baseball superstar Shohei Ohtani on the accusations his interpreter pilfered millions from the pitcher.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Jackson Prosco.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Global News has learned a former member of China's People's Liberation Army who spent decades with China's cyber warfare department has been living in Winnipeg and now faces deportation. The revelations come on a day when some of Canada's closest allies revealed they've faced cyber attacks by hackers with links to the Chinese government, while allegations of Chinese interference in Canadian elections will be central to hearings resuming this week in Ottawa, with the Prime Minister expected to testify in the near future. China is accused of hacking Canadian individuals, government agencies, and human rights organizations, and as Jeff Semple reports, this latest case raises questions about Canada's ability to screen foreign nationals who served in hostile governments.
China's army is the world's largest, but increasingly its battlefield of choice is online.
A serious case of cyber espionage has been revealed in this country, and the suspect behind it is China. Our spy agency detected hackers infiltrating the National Research Council.
Global News has deeper insight into what led to the collapse of Nortel and how China may have been involved.
China is accused of conducting extensive cyber attacks on Canadian targets, and Global News has learned a military veteran with China's cyber warfare department is now living in Canada.
Hi there.
Reached at his home in Winnipeg, Hua Che-shu declined to comment. The lieutenant colonel retired from the military in 2018 after 2 decades and moved to Canada in 2021. Questioned by immigration officers, he denied any involvement in China's cyber warfare program, but Shu admitted he was an instructor at the Information Engineering University. The school is widely considered by Western intelligence analysts to be China's top military academy for cyber espionage. This Chinese state TV program appears to show the school's software conducting cyber attacks on an American university and Falun Gong websites.
China is the top of the pile in terms of countries that we're concerned about, in terms of the volume of attacks that they're capable of.
It's a difficult process to go through, for sure.
Daniel Thalheimer is one of 20,000 Canadians whose information was stolen in a suspected Chinese cyber attack on Equifax in 2017. Hackers emptied Thalheimer's accounts of around $30,000. He's still dealing with the fallout.
And yet the threat is still occurring every day, all day. I think Canada should take this issue seriously.
This Canadian member of China's persecuted Uyghur minority says this is just the latest example of alleged members of hostile and oppressive regimes moving to Canada.
We have a lot of flaws in our system and a lot of loopholes in our immigration system.
A court case to decide whether Xu should be deported is now being considered by Canada's Immigration Refugee Board. The IRB, incidentally, has also been targeted a decade ago by a suspected Chinese military cyber attack. Jackson?
Jeff Semple in Toronto, thanks. Tonight, both the US and UK are revealing they faced serious cybersecurity breaches at the hands of Chinese hackers. The UK says the Chinese state-affiliated groups targeted MPs and UK's Electoral Commission. In Washington, the US State Department announced sanctions against members of the same group known as App 31, alleging the hackers with ties to the Chinese government targeted US officials, politicians, and critical infrastructure, presenting a significant national security threat. After nearly 6 months of catastrophic fighting between Israel and Hamas, the United Nations Security Council has passed a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza.
The draft resolution has been adopted.
The resolution demands a halt to the fighting for the remainder of the holy month of Ramadan, along with the immediate release of all hostages taken captive by Hamas. The U.S. abstained from the vote, but key here, it did not veto the measure. Tonight, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is accusing Washington of abandoning its policy on the war. Redmond Shannon reports.
The demeanors of the Palestinian observer and Israeli ambassador said as much as their words ever could.
To this council, Israeli blood is cheap. This is a travesty, and I am disgusted.
Life must prevail in Gaza. Must prevail in Gaza. Freedom must prevail in Palestine.
The Security Council vote comes after previous failed attempts where either the US or Russia and China exercised their vetoes as permanent members.
Abstention.
On Monday, the US abstained, allowing the resolution to pass 14-0. It calls for an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, half of which has already passed, an immediate unconditional release of all hostages, and for the lifting of all barriers to aid in Gaza. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the resolution must be implemented. Failure would be unforgivable. The resolution text did not condemn Hamas. Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu said the US has abandoned its policy on the war, and he has cancelled a diplomatic delegation to Washington. He and his UN ambassador say a ceasefire must be conditional on hostages being released.
It gives Hamas terrorists the hope to get a ceasefire without releasing the hostages.
The US ambassador sought to reassure its ever more isolated ally.
We fully support some of the critical objectives in this non-binding resolution.
Controversially calling the vote non-binding, even though Security Council votes are widely regarded as legally binding. Hamas has welcomed the vote, but it is not subject to UN resolutions, and even Israel can't be forced by the UN to abide. Ultimately, the power to sanction Israel would lie in the hands of world powers, in particular the US. Jackson?
Redmond Shannon in London, thanks. Canada has begun airlifting vulnerable Canadians out of Haiti as conditions there deteriorate. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly says eligible Canadians are being picked up by helicopter and flown to the Dominican Republic.
The Dominican Republic has strict eligibility requirements for all those entering the country. Only Canadian citizens who have a valid Canadian passport will be eligible for this assisted departure.
Jolie says less than 30 eligible Canadians have come forward for immediate departure. 18 of them left today. Close to 300 Canadians have requested assistance to leave Haiti since violence erupted earlier this month among rival gangs, closing the international airport. As Russia recovers from last week's concert attack that killed at least 137 people, the Russian president again directed blame at Ukraine. Vladimir Putin blamed what he called radical Islamists, claiming the attack was part of what he called a wider campaign of intimidation by Ukraine. All 4 gunmen arrested appeared in court late Sunday, appearing heavily beaten before being charged with committing an act of terror. Russian officials have alleged Ukrainian involvement without offering proof. Kyiv has issued a firm denial. And in the wake of that attack, Russia has dramatically stepped up strikes on Ukraine, pummeling the capital and Ukraine's energy supply network. Once again today, Russian missiles targeted Kyiv, hitting a residential area, destroying a 3-story building. At least 10 people were injured. The U.S. ambassador to Ukraine says Russia used hypersonic missiles to attack the capital. Ukraine's foreign minister repeated calls for international allies to supply more air defense weapons to fend off the attacks. Donald Trump is celebrating a major win in the courts tonight. A New York appeals judge gave the Republican presidential candidate a partial lifeline. He gets more time and can put up less money to mount his appeal of the nearly $500 million civil fraud judgment against him.
There's a decision we appreciate and respect the appellate division very much. We have a judge who I believe is a crooked judge and a crooked attorney general. Absolutely crooked.
Trump slammed the New York judge who oversaw the civil fraud suit and the attorney general who filed it, alleging it to be politically motivated. The appeals court ruled to reduce the bond to $175 million. Reggie Cicchini joins us from Washington now. And Reggie, we know Trump has just over a week to find the money, but we're still talking about a huge amount here.
Well, the biggest question, Jackson, is where Trump will source this bond payment from. His lawyers had already raised concern over his liquid assets, saying much of his wealth is tied up in real estate, and that may be why no company would issue him a bond in the first place. But Trump did say that this will be paid for in cash, right around the time that he ignored questions from reporters to whether a foreign government may assist him. Now, if Trump does post his bond, it's expected to stay proceedings through September, which would deal a significant delay to the state's attorney general, who wouldn't be able to enforce collection against him.
The Attorney General still has the judgment. That is going to be appealed. If he loses, the Attorney General will still have $175 million plus interest in hand, and now can go after Trump on the enforcement procedure if he loses the appeal. And so there'll be lots of pickings from the field, so to speak.
So, Reggie, while there was good news for Trump in one case, he was also dealt a blow in the first criminal trial against him. Tell us more about the case that a judge now says can proceed.
Well, Jackson, this one carries historical significance because this will be the first ever criminal trial against a former president. If you remember, it's allegations that business records were falsified to cover a payment to bury stories about an alleged affair with an adult film star. This trial was actually supposed to start today, but after federal prosecutors released thousands of documents related to the trial just a few weeks ago, Trump's team asked for a delay. And today, the judge said this wasn't the fault of the DA's office and scheduled the trial to begin with jury selection on April 15th, which will not be easy, given Trump is such a polarizing figure. And Jackson, that's highlighted in new polling that suggests 44% of American voters say a conviction in this case won't affect the likelihood that they would support Donald Trump for president. Jackson?
Reggie Cicchini in Washington, thanks. Millions of Americans are bracing for more severe weather as a major spring storm sweeps the U.S. Several states are under weather alerts after being pummeled by heavy snow and rain over the weekend. California was hit with hail and flooding. This woman had to be rescued from a river in Los Angeles after being swept away Sunday. More than 30 centimeters of snow fell across New England. Thousands of residents there are still without power. And parts of the Midwest remain under blizzard warnings as the storm pushes north. Environment Canada has issued winter storm warnings across central Ontario with heavy snow expected through Tuesday night. It's been one problem after another for Boeing. Coming up, what's next for the company as its CEO gears up to step down? A major shakeup at Boeing tonight as the plane maker announces a sudden change in its senior leadership. Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun is stepping down at the end of the year. The head of Boeing's commercial airplanes division is retiring, and the chair of the board is also stepping aside. The departures cap off a turbulent period for Boeing following a series of deadly crashes and high-profile incidents, including that recent door blowout. Tonight, Ann Gaviola looks at how Boeing flew so badly off course.
The guest of honor, the Queen of the Skies.
The last Queen of the Skies rolled off Boeing's production line last year, a symbol of a bygone era for the plane maker, one where safety came first. The 747 jet deliveries peaked in the 1990s. That's when industry analysts say a major culture shift at Boeing began. Boeing's leadership dominated by a series of corporate men.
The philosophy that I think has been enforced in the last 25 years has been we should think about airplanes just like you might think about a consumer product or selling insurance or whatever, that we run this business like any other business.
But aerospace isn't like any other business.
Clearly there was problems with quality. There was a problem that is causing their reputation around the world to be in trouble. So this is something they should have dealt with a while ago.
Dave Calhoun was appointed to the top job in 2019 after the company fired previous CEO Dennis Muhlenberg for his handling of the aftermath of 2 deadly 737 MAX crashes that killed nearly 350 people. This year, Boeing has been plagued with safety and quality issues, from the door plug that blew off a Boeing 737 mid-air in January, to the whistleblower who turned up dead of apparent suicide after testifying against the plane maker, to the terrifying plunge aboard a flight to New Zealand that left more than 50 people injured. Whether Boeing can enact the lasting cultural change U.S. federal authorities are calling for depends on who takes over. Will it be another so-called bean counter or someone with a background in aviation?
We won't really know what's going to happen at Boeing until we see kind of whether the engineering side wins out or the financial engineering side wins out.
We don't yet know who will succeed Calhoun. Some analysts say fast-rising Stephanie Pope, a longtime Boeing executive, is a top contender, while others say her new appointment as head of the commercial planes division clears the way for an outsider to take over from Calhoun. Jackson?
Ann Gaviola in Toronto. Thanks, Ann. Ahead, how a baseball superstar got caught up in a sports betting scandal. Major League Baseball's $700 million man is at the center of a brewing scandal. Star player Shohei Ohtani issued a statement today over allegations his interpreter stole from him and used his money for illegal gambling. Ohtani says he is sad and shocked about the alleged theft, but there are questions over whether he may have had any involvement himself. Eric Sorensen explains.
The biggest name in the game, 3 months after signing a $700 million U.S. contract with the Los Angeles Dodgers, Shohei Ohtani and his millions and his interpreter are at the center of a betting scandal.
First of all, I would like to thank the Los Angeles Dodgers.
Ipe Mizuhara, Otani's longtime interpreter and good friend, is being investigated after reported wire transfers from Otani's bank account over time totaling $4.5 million US to a bookmaking operation in California. Gambling is illegal in California. First reports attributed to Mizuhara suggested Otani was covering Mizuhara's gambling debts. But when the news broke publicly, Otani's lawyers issued a statement. Shohei has been the victim of a massive theft. In his first at-bat in the Dodgers season opener in Seoul last week, Otani and Mizuhara were kibitzing in the dugout during the game. Hours later, Mizuhara was fired by the Dodgers. Late today, Otani, with a new interpreter at his side, said that Mizuhara's accounts of Otani's involvement are lies.
I'm very saddened and shocked that someone who I'm trusted has done this. I never bet on baseball or any other sports, or never have asked somebody to do it on my behalf. In conclusion, Ipe has been stealing money from my account and has told lies. All of this has been a complete lie.
The idea that such a close confidant of the biggest player in baseball could allegedly betray him in that manner involving his money, this is what's shocking.
Federal investigators are looking into it, as is Major League Baseball. Pro sports and sports betting have become inextricably linked and mutually enriched, but Otani and the Dodgers are distancing themselves from the interpreter before the scandal tarnishes the game of baseball and its brightest star. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Two properties belonging to rapper Sean Combs are being searched by U.S. Homeland Security agents tonight. Authorities say the raids in L.A. and Miami are connected to an ongoing investigation. Combs has been accused of sexual assault and sex trafficking in multiple civil lawsuits over the last several months. The rapper has denied the accusations against him. Give it back. Next, the legal battle over the ownership of a meteorite.
ये है लाहौर, जिंदा दिल लोगों का।
Triple firing confirmed. Gaining.
Russia's Soyuz spacecraft successfully docked with the International Space Station today. It arrived 2 days later than planned after its original launch had to be aborted because of a technical problem. The spacecraft was carrying 3 astronauts from Russia, Belarus, and the U.S. The Russian and Belarusian will return to Earth on April 6th. The American will stay on board the International Space Station for the next 6 months. And finally tonight, a legal battle over a meteorite found in Sweden may be headed for that country's Supreme Court. The 14-kilogram chunk of iron rock landed on private property back in November of 2020, but ever since it's been in the middle of a court fight over who owns something that fell from the sky. Mike Armstrong explains.
It lit up the sky first over Finland and soon after Sweden as it tumbled to Earth. The sound the meteorite made came considerably later.
It really sounds out of this world when you hear this.
Johan Belsalhana was watching a movie with his family the night the meteor landed. From the sound, he knew it was close and searched for days. Well, as it turned out, the meteorite turned up at a museum. The 14-kilogram iron rock had been found by 2 geologists on his property, and he hadn't been told. Belsalhana says he'd have given it to the museum as well, but that he wasn't happy with how things went down.
If you find something on someone else's property, you can't just take it away.
What came next is a court battle that even sparked this documentary film. For 3 years, the two sides went back and forth. The first round was won by the geologists. A judge said there was nothing in Swedish law that covered meteorites, so they owned it. But the second round went to the landowner. An appeal court decided a meteorite is part of the property where it falls. In the decision handed down last week, the judge writes, even though it may intuitively feel like a meteorite is something foreign to the Earth, the court considers meteorites or space rocks as part of the immovable property, just like other stones. Now, in most countries, including Canada and the US, something that falls on private property belongs to the owner of that property. If it falls on government-owned land, it's owned by that government. Well, the Swedish geologists who lost their court case now have until the end of April to appeal to the Supreme Court. As it turns out, the meteorite fell from the sky into years of legal limbo. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
And that's Global National for this Monday night. I'm Jackson Prosco. Tonight's Your Canada is the Yukon River near Whitehorse. We always love to see Your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Carolyn Jar.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.